The sky over West City did not darken. It simply ceased to be. One moment, the sun was a warm, golden coin hanging above the pristine dome of Capsule Corp, casting its light upon the hum of machinery and the smell of ozone. The next, the blue vanished, replaced by a swirling, stagnant void of violet and gray, the color of a bruised eternity. Inside the laboratory, the change was instant. The holographic displays flickering with BULMA's latest temporal algorithms froze, the light dying in the air. BULMA, smiling at a breakthrough that would secure peace for her family, turned to share the triumph, but the words died in her throat. The air pressure dropped, heavy enough to crush bone. From a tear in the fabric of reality, a wound in the air that bled starlight, she descended. Eos, the former supreme Kai of time. She did not float. She stood upon the nothingness as if it were granite. Her eyes were not looking at BULMA. They were looking through her, seeing the timeline she had bent, the laws she had bruised. Vegeta, training in the gravity chamber, felt it instantly, not a key he recognized, but a sheer, absolute absence of life. He shattered the door, rushing to the garden, his heart hammering a frantic rhythm against his ribs. He arrived just in time to hear the sentence, delivered with the dispassionate coldness of a falling guillotine. For the crime of tampering with the sacred timeline, your existence is forfeit. Eos raised a gloved hand. She did not fire a blast. She simply pinched the air. And Vegeta, the prince of all Saiyans, the destroyer of worlds, froze. Not out of fear, but physics. A time lock. He was trapped in the nanosecond between a scream and a step, a living statue forced to witness the end of his world. Before the seconds unravel and the timeline burns to ash, anchor your soul to this moment. Subscribe now, lest this history be forgotten in the void. The universe did not end with a bang, nor a whimper. It ended with a pause. Vegeta was a man defined by motion, by the violence of his velocity, by the shattering impact of fist against bone, by the roar of ki tearing through the atmosphere. But now, he was a statue carved from living flesh. The time lock was absolute. It did not merely hold his muscles in place, it arrested the vibration of his atoms. He was trapped in the space between 2 seconds, a fly caught in the amber of a god's will. His body was frozen mid-sprint, one boot lifted from the grass of the Capsule Corp garden, his right hand outstretched, fingers clawing at the air, desperate to reach the terrace. His face was a mask of primal terror, eyes wide and unblinking, forced to stare at the scene unfolding 20 meters away. Inside the prison of his mind, however, time moved at an agonizing, hyper-accelerated rate. His thoughts were screaming, ricocheting against the walls of his skull with enough force to shatter a planet, but not a single sound escaped his lips. The silence was louder than any scream he had ever uttered. On the terrace, the air shimmered with a sickly, divine light. Eos stood there, floating just inches above the tiled floor. She looked bored. That was the detail that drove a spike of ice into Vegeta's heart. She did not look like a conqueror reveling in victory, nor a demon savoring cruelty. She looked like a gardener pulling a weed. Her expression was one of mild, bureaucratic disappointment. The mortal mind is plagued by the illusion of importance, Eos said, her voice bypassing the air and resonating directly within their minds. You believe your timeline, your choices, your little affections matter, but you are merely errors in the calculation, and errors must be corrected. BULMA stood before her. The datapad she had been holding had slipped from her fingers, but because of the time lock affecting the immediate area, it hung suspended in midair, rotating slowly. She wasn't looking at the deity. She was looking past Eos, locking eyes with Vegeta. There was no fear in her blue eyes. There was only a profound, heartbreaking confusion, followed by a sudden, sharp realization. She knew. In that suspended silence, she knew this was the one equation she could not solve. She opened her mouth to speak, to call his name, but the sound was swallowed by the vacuum of the spell. Eos raised her left hand. She didn't clench a fist. She didn't charge a sphere of destruction. She simply snapped her fingers, a soft, wet sound that echoed like a thunderclap in Vegeta's heightened senses. Erasure. Eos whispered. It began at Bulma's fingertips. Vegeta watched, his sanity fracturing, as the woman who had tamed the Prince of Saiyans began to come undone. It wasn't like the violent disintegration of a ki blast. It was slow. It was gentle. It was horrifyingly beautiful. Her skin didn't burn. It dissolved into shimmering golden dust, the raw sands of time itself. The tips of her fingers drifted away like pollen in a breeze. Then her hands, the golden specks floated upward, catching the sunlight, swirling around Eos in a mockery of a halo. Bulma raised her deteriorating arms, reaching out toward Vegeta. She was trying to bridge the gap, trying to touch him one last time. But with every microsecond, there was less of her to reach with. "Move!" Vegeta screamed internally, pushing against the paralysis with a will that had defied Frieza, Cell, and Buu. "Move, damn you! Shatter! Break! Do something!" But the laws of the Chronoverse were absolute. His ki flared, burning his own channels, boiling his blood within his frozen veins, but the exterior remained rigid. He was forced to watch the erasure creep up her arms, past her shoulders. The blue scarf she wore unraveled into light. The lab coat faded into history. Finally, it reached her face. Bulma didn't close her eyes. She kept them fixed on him until the very end. She mouthed two words, silent and eternal, etched into the reading of his soul. "It's okay." And then she was gone. Where Bulma Briefs had stood a moment ago, there was only a swirling cloud of golden particles dancing in the void. The datapad she had dropped finally obeyed gravity, clattering loudly onto the empty tiles. The sound was a gavel strike. Final. Irreversible. Eos lowered her hand, brushing a speck of golden dust from her shoulder with casual indifference. "Done," she murmured, turning her back on the emptiness she had created. "Now, for the rest of this aberrant timeline." She did not notice the temperature rising. She did not notice that the wind had stopped blowing or that the birds had ceased their songs. She did not notice that the time lock, a technique designed to hold gods in place, had developed a hairline fracture. In the garden, the statue of Vegeta remained still, but inside the casing of his flesh, something ancient had snapped. The grief that had washed over him a moment ago was gone, evaporated instantly by a heat so intense it transcended the physical realm. This was not the hot, explosive anger of a Super Saiyan. It was not the focused, tranquil fury of Ultra Ego. It was a rejection, a denial of reality so absolute that the universe began to tremble in sympathy. A single tear leaked from Vegeta's frozen eye. It did not fall. It hung there, shimmering, and then it turned black. The sound that followed was not of this world. It was not a scream, nor an explosion. It was the sickening, high-pitched whine of reality, buckling under a weight it was never designed to hold. Eos stopped. Her hand, raised to open a portal back to the nest of time, froze in mid-air. The hairs on the back of her neck stood up, a sensation she had not felt in eons. It was the primal biological warning of a predator entering the room. She turned slowly, her divine eyes narrowing as she looked back at the garden. The statue of Vegeta was vibrating. The time lock, a cage constructed from the rigid laws of causality, was visibly stressing. Spiderweb fractures of neon violet light appeared in the air around the Saiyan, cracking the very atmosphere like a struck pane of glass. The stillness of the garden was replaced by a low, throbbing hum that rattled the windows of West City. "Impossible," Eos whispered, her voice betraying a flicker of genuine shock. "You are frozen in a nanosecond. You cannot generate kinetic energy. You cannot." The black tear that had leaked from Vegeta's eye finally fell. It hit the grass, but it didn't water the earth. It burned a hole straight through the soil, sizzling with an energy that looked like liquid antimatter. Crack. The sound was like a gunshot. A piece of the frozen air around Vegeta's fist shattered and fell away, dissolving into nothingness. Then another crack. Then another. The time lock wasn't failing. It was being eaten. Vegeta's ki, usually a vibrant gold or a divine blue, erupted from his body in a torrent of absolute darkness. It was a thick, viscous sludge of energy, blacker than the void between stars. But swirling within that darkness were millions of glittering specks, the golden dust, the remnants of BULMA. He was pulling the particles of her erased existence into his own aura, refusing to let them fade, binding her lost time to his own soul through a gravity of pure grief. You! Vegeta's voice ground out, sounding as if he were speaking through a mouthful of gravel and blood. He forced his head up, the motion jerky and unnatural, fighting the drag of time itself. You took. The ground beneath him vaporized. A crater formed instantly, not from an impact, but from the sheer crushing pressure of his presence. Eos stepped back, her composure fracturing. Stop this! You are immortal! You cannot wield the weight of a timeline! Vegeta roared. It wasn't a battle cry. It was the sound of a star collapsing. The time lock shattered completely, exploding outward in a shockwave of distorted gravity. The blast knocked Eos out of the sky, slamming her boots onto the terrace tiles. When the dust settled, the Prince of Saiyans was gone. In his place stood an anomaly. Vegeta's armor had transfigured. The standard Capsule Corp battlesuit was gone, replaced by a jagged, natural plating formed from his own hardened ki dark gray and etched with glowing purple fissures. His hair did not stand up in the golden flame of Super Saiyan, nor flow in the blue of godhood. It remained in its base shape, but it was pitch black, consuming the light around it, with tips that flickered with that same tragic golden dust. But it was his eyes that made the former supreme Kai of time take a step back in genuine horror. There were no pupils. There were no irises. There was only the swirling, chaotic imagery of a broken clock, two voids of spinning time, ticking backward. This was no longer Ultra Ego. This was the Time Breaker. Vegeta took a step forward. He didn't walk across the grass. He teleported through the intervening space, glitching into existence directly in front of Eos. The movement was instant, bypassing the linear flow of seconds. You said my existence was forfeit, Vegeta whispered. His voice was layered, a chorus of his past, present, and future selves speaking in unison. He reached out, his hand glowing with that terrible, beautiful black and gold energy. Eos panicked. For the first time in her divine life, she reacted on instinct. She threw a blast of Chronos energy, a white beam designed to age its target into dust, instantly point blank at his chest. The beam hit Vegeta and vanished. It didn't deflect. It was absorbed. The golden specks in his aura flared brighter, feeding on the time energy she had just gifted him. Vegeta's hand closed around Eos' throat. The contact sizzled. Eos gasped, clawing at his gauntlet. But her fingers passed through his wrist as if he wasn't fully there. He was existing in a state of flux, present enough to hurt her, but absent enough to be untouchable. You erased her future, Vegeta said, lifting the goddess off the ground as the sky above them turned a violent, bruising purple. So I will devour your past. He didn't squeeze. He pulled. A scream tore from Eos' lips, a sound that echoed across the 4 galaxies as Vegeta began to rip the divine temporal energy straight out of her body. He wasn't just fighting her. He was cannibalizing her divinity to fill the hole where BULMA used to be. The Earth could not contain them. The moment Vegeta began to siphon the chronology from Eos' veins, the local laws of physics surrendered. The sky above Capsule Corp didn't just break, it unzipped. With a sound like a cathedral bell tolling underwater, the ground beneath them vanished, and the 2 combatants fell upward into the fracture. They crashed into the crack of time, a dimension of absolute silence and swirling violet mists. Here, there was no north or south, no up or down. There were only shattered crystals the size of mountains floating in the void, each facet reflecting a different moment in history. A mirror showed Goku landing on Namek. Another showed Trunks slicing Frieza in half. Another showed a young Bulma searching for a Dragon Ball in a river. Eos tumbled through the air, regaining her balance and skidding to a halt atop a massive, floating cogwheel. She gasped, clutching her throat. Her divine aura was flickering, destabilized by the mortal who had dared to eat a piece of godhood. You abomination, she hissed. her voice echoing from every direction at once. "You think you can challenge me here? This is my court. Here, time is not a river. It is a weapon." Vegeta slammed down onto a platform of crystallized memory opposite her. He didn't land gracefully. He landed with the weight of a dying star, cracking the surface. The black aura around him pulsed like a heartbeat, the golden specks of BULMA's dust swirling faster, forming a protective ring around his core. "Your court," Vegeta growled, the sound vibrating through the crystals. "Then I will be the judge." Eos raised both hands, her eyes glowing a blinding white. "Let us see if you can fight your own failures, Prince of No One." She swept her arms forward, and the mists of time coalesced into solid shapes. From the fog stepped three nightmares. First, the tyrant Frieza, in his final form, sneering with the arrogance that had once broken Vegeta's spirit on Namek. Second, Perfect Cell, the bio-android who had murdered his son while Vegeta watched, powerless. Third, Majin Buu, the pink monster who had laughed as Vegeta sacrificed his life in vain. These were not mere illusions. They were time remnants, hard light constructs pulled from the moments of Vegeta's greatest defeats. They possessed the same ki, the same malice, and the same power as the originals. Die in the past. Eos commanded. The Frieza Phantom fired a death beam. The Cell Phantom launched a solar Kamehameha. The Buu Phantom unleashed an angry explosion. The combined energy was enough to vaporize a galaxy. It struck Vegeta dead center. An explosion of light consumed the platform. Eos smiled, her confidence returning. No mortal mind could withstand the physical and psychological weight of their worst traumas manifesting at once. But as the smoke cleared, the smile vanished. Vegeta was still standing. He hadn't blocked. He hadn't dodged. He had taken the attacks head-on. His armor was cracked, and smoke rose from his skin, but there was no blood. Instead of red liquid, the wounds leaked glowing, golden sand. The Timebreaker form had not just hardened his body, it had weaponized his trauma. Vegeta walked forward, step by heavy step. As he passed the Phantom of Frieza, he didn't look at it. He simply raised a hand, and the Phantom disintegrated into gray ash. "You mistake me, Kai," Vegeta said, his voice terrifyingly calm. "You think these memories hurt me? You think reminding me of my weakness breaks me?" He walked through the solar Kamehameha of the Cell Phantom, the beam parting around his black aura like water around a stone. He reached out and crushed the Cell Phantom's head with a single squeeze. "I have lived with these ghosts every day of my life," Vegeta roared, the volume rising with the black tide of his ki. "I carry them in my sleep! I carry them in my pride! They are not my weakness! They are the fuel that burns in the engine of my soul!" He obliterated the Buu Phantom with a mere glare, the pressure of his spirit tearing the construct apart. Eos shrieked in frustration. She slammed her hands together, invoking her ultimate authority. "If you will not break, then you will be reset." Chronos rewind. A massive clock face appeared beneath Vegeta's feet. The hands began to spin backward wildly. Eos was attempting to revert Vegeta's personal timeline to wind him back to the moment before he transformed, before BULMA died, to a point where he was weak and unaware. Vegeta's body began to flicker. His armor started to revert to the standard blue jumpsuit. The black aura began to thin. He was being dragged backward against his will. "No!" Eos screamed triumphantly. "Go back to being nothing!" Vegeta grit his teeth, the veins on his forehead bulging. He looked down at the clock face spinning beneath him. He thought of BULMA. Not the scientist, not the genius, but the wife who had bandaged his wounds, the mother who had given him a family, the woman who had just whispered, "It's okay," as she died. Vegeta planted his feet. The gears of the magical clock ground against each other, screeching sparks. "Will not!" He bent his knees, fighting the pull of an entire dimension. "Forget!" With a roar that shattered the crystals floating in the void, Vegeta punched the ground. He didn't hit the floor. He punched the concept of the rewind. His fist slammed into the magical clock face, shattering the dial. The hands of the clock stopped. Then, with a groan of tortured metal, they began to spin forward, fast, violently fast. The spell broke. The backlash hit Eos like a physical blow, knocking her backward. Vegeta stood amidst the ruin of the spell, his timebreaker form fully restored, but now larger, denser, more volatile. The golden dust of BULMA's essence was no longer just swirling, it was fusing with his skin, creating glowing golden veins that ran through the darkness. He had rejected the reset. He had locked his timeline through sheer refusal to let go of his pain. Vegeta looked up at the terrified goddess. "My past is mine," he said, and the void trembled. "And now, your future is, too." The battle had ceased to be a fight. It had become an event of cosmological horror. Far away, in the sacred nebula of the Destroyer's world, the teacup in Whis' hand developed a hairline fracture. The angel, usually unflappable, froze. He did not look at Beerus, but his gaze turned sharp, piercing through the dimensions toward Earth. Next to him, Lord Beerus woke from a nap, not with a yawn, but with a shudder. The god of destruction felt a chill that had nothing to do with temperature. It was the sensation of his own existence, flickering, like a candle in a sudden draft. "Whis," Beerus muttered, his voice devoid of its usual laziness. "What is that? That isn't Hakai. That isn't divine ki. It feels like everything is stopping. It is Vegeta, my lord," Whis replied, his voice grave. He tapped his staff, attempting to project an image of the battle, but the crystal orb remained dark, filled only with static. "He has breached the crack of time. He is no longer drawing power from his body. He is burning the concept of history as fuel. I cannot intervene. The door to that dimension has been welded shut by a rage I have never witnessed, not even in the era of the Omni-King." Inside the crack of time, the reality was far worse than Whis surmised. The dimension was collapsing. The floating crystals of history were detonating one by one, erasing the moments they held. A Tuesday in age 762 vanished. The memory of a rainfall in age 780 ceased to exist. Vegeta was consuming the timeline to sustain his form. He was a black hole of chronology, a singularity of Saiyan will that devoured the past to secure a future. Eos was retreating. The supreme Kai of time, the guardian of the scrolls, was fleeing. Her divine robes were torn, her skin scorched by the black radiation emanating from the prince. She threw galaxies at him, literally summoning the temporal weight of entire star systems and hurling them as projectiles. Vegeta didn't even block. He walked through the spiraling galaxies, his body phasing in and out of existence. When a star struck his chest, it didn't burn him. It turned gray and crumbled into ash. He was an inevitability. "You are destroying the tapestry of existence." Eos screamed, her voice cracking with desperation. She summoned the sacred scrolls of eternity, forming a shield of absolute law around herself. "If you kill me, you kill the regulator. Time will bleed out. Chaos will reign. Everything you love will rot in a stagnant void." Vegeta stopped. He stood on a fragment of nothingness, 20 meters from the goddess. The golden veins on his body pulsed violently, the dust of BULMA reacting to Eos' proximity. "Everything I love," Vegeta repeated. The words were soft, yet they hit Eos with the force of a physical blow. He raised his hands, spreading them wide. The black aura exploded outward, filling the horizon, blocking out the swirling violet mists. But then, he brought his hands together, fingers curled inward, in a stance that the universe remembered well. It was the stance of his final sacrifice against Majin Buu, the final atonement. But this time, he wasn't sacrificing his life. He was sacrificing the timeline. "You speak of order," Vegeta roared, the sound tearing the fabric of the dimension. "You speak of regulations. You prune lives because they don't fit your math. But you forgot one variable, Kai. Between his hands, a sphere of energy formed. It wasn't yellow or blue. It was a void, a perfect sphere of absolute darkness, ringed by a halo of blinding, tragic gold. It spun with a sickening hum, the sound of seconds screaming as they died. The Saiyan race. Vegeta's eyes, those terrible broken clocks, locked onto hers. "Does not accept your limits," Eos realized. with a jolt of pure terror, what he was doing. He was charging an attack that wouldn't just kill her body. It would erase her concept. It would strike her from the beginning of time to the end, ensuring she had never existed to judge him. "Wait!" Eos shrieked, holding up her hands. "We can bargain! I can bring her final!" Vegeta didn't listen. He didn't care. The offer was an insult. He didn't want a gift from a god. He wanted to take back what was stolen. The sphere collapsed in on itself, becoming dense enough to bend light. Atonement of time. He thrust his hands forward. The beam that erupted was silent. It was a torrent of negative history. It washed over Eos, and she didn't burn. She unhappened. The shield of scrolls disintegrated into ink and paper, then into nothing. Her scream was cut short not because she died, but because her throat, her voice, and her birth were scrubbed from the record. The beam continued past her, punching a hole through the crack of time, piercing the veil of the universe, and screaming out into the white void beyond creation. The recoil shattered Vegeta's armor. The black form flickered, unable to sustain the output, but he held it. He poured every second of his life, every memory of his battles, every ounce of his pride into the blast. And then the light swallowed everything. The light did not fade. It settled. The blinding whiteness of the final atonement retracted, folding back into the seams of reality like a receding tide. The crack of time, that violet dimension of floating crystals and broken clocks, was gone. In its place was the smell of ozone, wet earth, and the familiar humid warmth of a West City afternoon. Vegeta fell. He did not land on his feet. The Timebreaker form had consumed every calorie, every joule of ki, and nearly every thread of his life force. The jagged, black armor of hardened time crumbled into gray ash, flaking away from his body as he plummeted from the sky. He struck the lawn of Capsule Corp with a dull, heavy thud, rolling onto his back. He lay there, staring up at the sky. It was blue again. The terrible violet bruise was gone. The clouds drifted lazily, pushed by a gentle wind, completely ignorant of the fact that seconds ago they had ceased to exist. Vegeta tried to lift his arm, but his muscles were lead. His breathing was ragged, a harsh rasping sound that hurt his chest. He was empty. The bottomless well of rage had run dry, leaving only a hollow ache where his heart beat slowly, stubbornly. He was alive, but he was alone. I failed, he thought, the bitterness tasting like copper in his mouth. He had killed the god. He had erased Eos. But in doing so, he had surely burned the energy that held the memory of his wife. The golden dust, the particles of BULMA he had fought so hard to keep, had been the fuel for that final blast. He had traded her memory for revenge. It was the most Saiyan thing he could have done, and he hated himself for it. He closed his eyes, waiting for the grief to kill him. But then he felt it, a warmth. Not the heat of battle, nor the burn of a sun. A gentle, impossible warmth brushing against his cheek. Vegeta opened his eyes. The air above him was glittering. The ash from his crumbled armor wasn't gray anymore. It was glowing. Tiny, persistent specks of gold were rising from his skin, lifting from the scorched grass, floating out of the pores of the earth. The universe was trying to correct itself. The timeline, now headless without Eos to prune it, was frantically searching for its shape. It sought equilibrium. And the strongest anchor point in this timeline, the heaviest gravity well remaining, was Vegeta's will. His refusal to let her go had scarred the fabric of reality. He had imprinted her existence so deeply into the quantum foam of the universe that the cosmos had no choice but to obey. The golden dust swirled, faster and faster, a miniature galaxy forming right there in the garden. It didn't look like magic. It looked like a memory being remembered in high definition. First, the outline of boots, then the curve of legs, the flow of a lab coat, the brightness of turquoise hair. Vegeta forced himself up. He groaned, his body screaming in protest, but he dragged himself to his knees. He had to see it. He had to know if it was a ghost or a miracle. The light flared one last time, blindingly bright, and then vanished. Bulma Brief stood on the grass. She blinked, looking around with a slightly dazed expression. She held her hand out, as if expecting to catch the datapad she had dropped an eternity ago. She looked at the sky, then at the crater in the garden, and finally down at the man kneeling before her. Vegeta, she asked, her voice clear, annoyed, and wonderfully, beautifully mundane. What on earth happened? The sensors just went haywire for a second. And why do you look like you've been hit by a truck? She didn't remember. The erasure had been instant, the return seamless. To her, only a skipped beat had passed. Vegeta stared at her, his vision blurred, not from injury, but from water. The prince of all Saiyans, the man who had stared down gods of destruction and laughed in the face of death, began to tremble. He didn't stand up. He couldn't. He simply reached out, wrapping his arms around her waist, burying his face in the fabric of her lab coat. He held her with a desperation that threatened to crack her ribs, anchoring himself to the only reality that mattered. Vegeta. Bulma's tone softened instantly. She sensed it then, the trembling, the terrifying silence of a man who never showed weakness. She didn't ask again. She simply dropped her hands to his shoulders, her fingers tangling in his messy, sweat-matted hair. It's okay. I'm here. Don't. Vegeta's voice broke, a rough whisper muffled by her coat. Don't. Ever. Leave. I'm not going anywhere, you big idiot, she whispered back, resting her chin on his head, watching the sun set over a city that was never meant to survive. High above them, beyond the atmosphere, the stars began to twinkle into existence one by one. They burned quietly, steady and true, as if afraid to disturb the peace of the man who had broken time to keep his world whole. The timeline flowed on, a river around a stone. But the stone remained,